Hello friends, welcome to the Unbelievable Tales channel. Enjoy the story.
12 dates, 12 rejections. For millionaire Cyrus Rose, love had become nothing more than a transaction, until one quiet evening when a tired waitress spoke to him like no one else ever had. Bri Buckley wasn't from his world. She was a single mom, working double shifts to raise her deaf son, Evan. What began as a fleeting exchange would shatter Cyrus's walls, force him to confront his deepest fear of fatherhood, and prove that sometimes the smallest family can heal the loneliest heart. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The ballroom at the Windermere Hotel glittered like a jewelry case someone had forgotten to close. Strings of crystal swung from the ceiling and caught the light. Champagne hissed into long-stemmed flutes. Laughter curled and rose like the steam from the buffets. Cyrus Rose moved through it all with the practiced ease of a man who had paid for half of it and could purchase the rest if he changed his mind. His tuxedo fit like a decision. His smile was precise, the kind that photographs accept without argument. He could have been the advertisement for the evening, and maybe he was. He knew where to stand to be found, how long to look to be wanted, how deeply to nod to be remembered. But none of it reached him. Sound bounced off the glass walls of his life and came back as echoes. In the seven-figure hush of wealth, even praise sounded like small talk. A woman in a silver dress touched his elbow. "Cyrus, darling, your last acquisition? Genius." Her eyes shone with a keen, hungry admiration that wasn't for him. He thanked her. He forgot her name. She moved on. He had been on a date an hour earlier, 12 in the last 3 months if he was counting, which he was not and also was. The women had been luminous, fluent in the geography of power, who had shifted to which board, which couple had separated quietly, which charity gala could buy redemption with better lighting. They arrived late on purpose, in the exact shade of lipstick approved by a magazine that never paid for its own photographs. They asked him questions about himself and listened only until he said the answer they preferred. He had tried believing, at first, that it was merely a matter of meeting the right one. But every time the waiter set down the second course, he could feel the same closing of doors inside him, the same soft thud of disappointment. He would watch his date gesture with elegant fingers and think of a harbor with no boats in it, beautiful, empty, echoing. Tonight's was the cleanest rejection yet, though he was the one to speak it. Halfway through the pear salad, as the woman across from him described a villa she had never visited but intended to inherit, he set down his fork and said evenly, "I think we are both looking for different things." She blinked, as if a waiter had spilled water on her. He paid the bill, tipped too much, walked out into the evening with the unhurried stride of a man who had just saved himself several hours he could not afford to waste. Outside, the winter air had edges. Cyrus breathed it in and let the cold map its way into his chest. Traffic hummed. A violinist on the corner pinned a tender melody to the streetlights. The revolving door breathed people in and out of the hotel like an enormous, polite lung. Somewhere a siren grew small and then smaller. He loosened his cufflinks and tightened his self-control. He could still describe the moment he learned that love could be a ledger entry. It had not happened in a boardroom, though there had been plenty of those. It had not happened in a prenup, though there had been that too. It had happened 6 years earlier, on a Tuesday thick with rain, when the woman he thought would be his wife placed a ring on the coffee table and said she wanted a life with more certainty. The certainty had arrived 40 days later in the form of a hedge fund partner with the exact portfolio her mother approved. Cyrus had not argued. He had felt something persuade itself to sleep inside him, and he had let it. Work was simpler. In the language of deals and diligence, people told the truth without meaning to. Numbers confessed. Contracts did not pretend to love. The market could turn on you rapidly and without mercy, but at least it didn't try to kiss you afterward. He crossed the curb and signaled his driver, then changed his mind and waved the car away. He wanted to walk. The city kept its own company and would allow him to borrow it. He passed the lit windows of restaurants, worlds inside boxes, opera behind glass. He passed a florist carrying in racked buckets of wilted stems. He passed a bakery where a woman in a paper hat iced a cake with movements that looked like apology and pride mixed together. He stopped at a smaller place around the corner from the hotel, the kind of restaurant that did not advertise but was always full, a neighborhood institution with good soup and humble provincial courage. It reminded him of the cafes his mother had loved for their coffee and their people, long before his name could buy private rooms where noise never touched you. He stepped inside without removing the loneliness from his shoulders. Warmth hit him, then garlic, then the sound of plates in motion and spoons consenting to be useful. The room was a conversation of tables. A couple argued gently about daisies. Two construction workers stared wearily into bowls the size of small lakes. A middle-aged man ate alone and read a book so intently that the soup cooled beside him and he did not notice. Behind the counter, a chalkboard announced, with exhausted sincerity, "Today's special. This soup will fix nothing and still help." Cyrus smiled at that. A hostess offered him a seat at the back, near a door that sugared the floor with winter every time it opened. He took it gratefully. The table rocked slightly and he steadied it with a folded napkin, a move he had performed in 100 restaurants and 1,000 meetings. The waiter arrived with water and the soft, inattentive kindness of someone who had been listening to other people's appetites since noon. The waitress who came for his order was not the one who had floated through the Windermere an hour before, smelling faintly of absolution that could be bought by the bottle. This one wore her hair pinned in a no-nonsense knot that had once been tidy and had given up. She had the kind of tiredness that does not perform. Her eyes were clear and direct. The skin at her knuckles showed the story of a sink that had been too cold for too long. The name on her tag, Bri, looked like a promise someone had kept small so it could survive. "Evening," she said, with the confident neutrality of a professional who did not require his mood to earn her paycheck. "We're out of mushroom risotto and second chances, but everything else is available." It surprised him into a short, real laugh. "Then I'll take the tomato soup," he said. "And the bread that arrives pretending to be free." Her mouth quirked. "Nothing's free, but it tries." She glanced at his tuxedo without comment and wrote the order down with the quick, small handwriting of someone who has learned to waste nothing, not even space. "Anything else?" He heard himself say, "Yes," and was startled by his own voice. "If you were me, what would you order to feel less like a man made entirely of glass?" Bri didn't blink. She didn't do what wealth made people do, either perform or retreat. She looked at him with the unflinching decency of someone who had seen a great many kinds of pain and filed them by size. "The stew," she said. "It stays with you longer, and it doesn't ask questions about your day." A beat. "You don't look like stew is your usual choice." "It isn't," he admitted. "Maybe that's the point." She nodded once, as if he had passed a test neither of them was grading, and left. He watched her move through the crowded room with a precision that looked like care. She topped off water glasses while listening to a little boy explain, in enormous detail, why he liked buses. She handed a plate to a man whose wrist shook with age and did not pretend not to notice. He realized he was holding his breath. The soup arrived first, honest and red and steaming. The bread followed, heroic and warm, the butter in a little cup that refused to be fancy. The stew came last, its surface shining with the kind of humility that earns loyalty. Cyrus took a spoonful and felt his body remember a hunger he had fed poorly for a long time. People would have been scandalized to see him thus, alone at a wobbly table, eating the recommended stew with reverence. But there was no photographer here interested in this particular scandal. Bri checked on him once, briefly. "Good. Better," he said, and left it at that because she had earned brevity. He should have left it at that for the night as well. He should have paid, gone home to the high, glass quiet of his apartment, and filed the evening under anomalies. But the room held him longer than it needed to. He lingered over the last of the stew and watched lives brush past each other like coats on a hallway hook. The music from the kitchen was a radio station that played songs which were not good but remembered how to be comforting. Somewhere a timer argued with a cook and lost. When Bri returned with the check, she set it down and did not reach for it immediately. "Do you always come in dressed like a plot twist?" she asked lightly. "Only on nights I've fled a story I didn't want to finish," he answered, surprised at how easily the words came. "Smart," she said. "Bad stories always want sequels." She tilted her head slightly, read something in his face he had not intended to display, and added softer, "Whatever it is, some things you can't buy your way out of, but you don't have to buy your way through either." He looked up sharply. Strangers did not speak to him like that. Friends did not either. He had few and most communicated in the shorthand of deals. For a second, he wanted to tell her about the ring on the coffee table, about the way Tuesday rain has a particular sound when a life changes under it. He wanted to confess that the women he met reminded him of exquisite houses with no beds in them. He wanted to say that his chest felt like a locked room and he had misplaced the key on purpose. Instead, he said, "I appreciate the recommendation. The stew. You'll live," she said, which somehow meant more than take care. Then she smiled, an unrhetorical curve, not the kind bestowed because he was valuable, and walked away to take another order. He paid in cash and left too large a tip and immediately regretted the size of it, not because of the money but because of what it might say. He almost turned back to apologize for the implication, to tell her that some habits are just muscle memory and have nothing to do with the person across the table. He almost asked her name out loud, though it was pinned to her. Instead, he touched the door and stepped into the crisp night. The street had thinned. The violinist had moved on to warmer corners. The hotel sign still glowed like an unblinking eye. Cyrus stood a moment and let the cold finish its work. The stew's warmth traveled outward, shaking hands with the air. He felt unexpectedly steadier, like a building that had discovered its foundation underneath all the glass. He walked home because he wanted the time. He passed a bus stop where two teenagers argued in whispers and then forgave each other with the generous clumsiness of first apologies. He passed a laundry where the last cycle spun with the stubbornness of small machines. He passed his own reflection in a darkened storefront and did not recognize the man entirely, which was an invitation more than a threat. By the time he reached his apartment, the city had lowered its voice. The elevator delivered him to a floor that smelled faintly of lilies someone else had ordered. He let himself in, flicked on a line of lights, took off the tuxedo that fit like an answer to a different question. He placed his cufflinks in a dish he had never liked and his watch on a book he had never finished. He stood by the window and looked down at the tessellation of lives moving under him. Taxis like bees, streets like diagrams, windows like little squares of heat and story. He thought of Bri's hands, capable, chapped, uncomplaining, and of the way her voice did not oversell hope but offered it anyway. He thought of a line he had once heard, that some doors open only from the inside. He thought, with mild horror, that he had laughed twice in a single evening for no reason that made the paper. In the shadow on the far wall, the outline of his own life sat with him. The meetings, the acquisitions, the smooth, frictionless days that left his heart unmarked. He had been proud, in a bleak way, of how little he needed from anyone. Need made you slow. Need made you vulnerable. Need turned you into a story told by other people. And yet, in a small restaurant that did not accept reservations, someone had spoken to him like he was not a headline but a human, and a hunger had sat up and stretched in his chest as if woken from a too long sleep. He closed his eyes, and the faintest thread of a thought ran through him like warmth returning to cold hands. Perhaps the unbroken glass was the problem. He slept poorly and well by turns, poorly because memories do not permit uninterrupted rest, well because for the first time in months he wanted the next day to arrive. When the morning came, gray and undemonstrative, he drank coffee he did not need and dressed without looking at the suit as if it were complicit. He had not planned to return to the little restaurant. He did not plan to avoid it either. He told himself he would go wherever the day required and felt the lie smile at him. The elevator made its polite descent. The lobby sent him into the city like a letter he had not addressed. The air had softened a degree, the cold gentled by a sky that seemed to be remembering how to be generous. He did not check his phone until it insisted on being checked. He did not answer the first email, which was a small rebellion, and then the next two, which was a larger one. He turned the corner toward the office and saw, to his left, a bus kneeling at the curb, a small figure clambering up its steps with heroic determination. The boy wore a backpack that dwarfed him and a hat that took its responsibilities seriously. A woman bent to adjust his scarf with quick, competent fingers, and when the bus doors folded him patiently inward, she stood on the sidewalk and watched until it pulled away. She looked tired and undefeated. Her hair was pinned in the same knot that had given up and kept going. She stood in profile and he knew her. Bri. Cyrus stopped, then didn't. He kept walking because to stop would be to invent a reason. He told himself he would pass and be passed, that the city was large and had many women with the same posture of endurance. He told himself he did not have to say anything, that words were expensive when they mattered and he had already spent enough on them. But when she turned her head slightly and caught him afloat in the morning like a coin in a fountain, he lifted a hand in a gesture that asked permission from a distance. She did not wave back. She waited. "Morning," he said when he reached her, and the word felt true. "Morning," she echoed, and he heard in it a dozen other sentences. "I remember you. I see you. I have work." The stew did its job, he said, because gratitude, awkward and honest, was the only currency that felt respectable. "Good." The corner of her mouth moved. "You look less shiny today." "Working on it," he said. "Try boots instead of those," she suggested, glancing at the shoes that telegraphed who he was before he introduced himself. "Sidewalks are less impressed than ballrooms." "I'll make a note," he said, and meant it. They stood a moment in the city's untheatrical light. He wanted to ask her name and say it aloud, though he knew it already. He wanted to ask about the boy with the earnest backpack. He wanted to tell her that something in him had listened to her last night and was unwilling to go back to sleep. Instead he said, "Thank you for the recommendation," on both counts. And because he could feel the decision open under his feet like a steady stare, he added, "May I buy you coffee after your shift? Nothing fancy. A place where the tables wobble." Bri studied him, unblinking, as if measuring not the price of his invitation but the weight of it. When she answered, her voice was practical and kind, like a coat that fit. "Maybe, if I make it to the end of the shift without the universe asking for interest." She angled her head toward the street. "And if you can find a coffee that doesn't cost as much as rent." "I know a place," he said, surprised to realize he did. "It recommends stew." "That place tries," she said, and a small, real smile broke like weather. "I'll be done at 3. "I'll be there," he said, and felt absurdly, as if he had kept a promise to someone he wanted very much to know. He watched her walk away, shoulders squared, steps sure, hair obeying nothing, and understood with a clarity that chilled and steadied him. He had built a life so tidy that nothing could get inside it. And if he wanted to feel anything other than efficient and admired, he would have to open the door and risk the draft. He turned toward his office and went to work, and for the first time in a long time, the day did not feel like a contract he had forgotten to read. The morning crowd in Ellswood was already in motion when Bri Buckley tugged her coat tighter and guided her son, Evan, toward the school bus stop. She had slept 4 hours, 5 if you counted the restless dozing after midnight, but her movements were steady, practiced. Coffee in one hand, his backpack in the other, she crouched to fix his scarf. "Don't forget, you've got reading time today," she signed quickly, her hands moving with precision. Evan's brown eyes lit up, and he signed back, "I'll bring my drawing too." She smiled. "Of course you will. You always do." The bus hissed to a stop, doors folding open. Bri kissed his forehead. "Be good," she said, both aloud and in sign. He squeezed her hand, then climbed aboard. She waved until the bus turned the corner, her breath hanging in the air. For a second, the street was silent. That's when she saw him. Cyrus Rose, the tuxedoed stranger from last night, was standing half a block away. He wasn't in evening wear now, just a dark coat, sharp shoes that screamed money, and an expression caught somewhere between hesitation and curiosity. She frowned. "You again." He gave a small nod, stepping closer. "Seems the city isn't as big as people think." "Or you're following me," she replied flatly, shifting her bag higher on her shoulder. Cyrus almost smiled. "If I were, I'd be better at it. You'd never have noticed." That earned him the tiniest twitch of her lips, not quite a smile. "So what's your excuse?" "I was walking to the office," he said, "and I saw you. Lucky me." She turned, starting toward the corner cafe, but he followed, his long stride catching up easily. "Last night," he said, "you told me stew was better than soup. You were right." Bri stopped, her eyebrows lifting. "You came all the way here to tell me that?" "No. I came because—" He hesitated, something almost boyish flickering across his face. "Because you're the first person in months who's spoken to me without asking what I own or who I know." She studied him, hands tightening on her bag straps. "That's not a compliment. That's just normal." "For me," Cyrus said quietly, "normal is rare." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the hiss of a passing bus. Finally, Bri sighed. "Look, I don't know what you want, but I don't have time for men who think conversation is a novelty. I've got 2 jobs and a son who needs more from me than anyone else ever could. I'm not asking for your time, Cyrus said quickly. Then, with a small self-correcting smile, maybe just 5 minutes of it. Over coffee. She gave him a long, steady look. You don't even drink coffee, do you? His mouth quirked. I drink it badly. Against her better judgment, Bri let out a quiet laugh. She rubbed her temple. Fine. 5 minutes. But don't expect me to be impressed. I don't want you to be, he said simply. Inside the cafe, the bell over the door jingled tiredly. They slid into a booth by the window. Bri ordered black coffee. Cyrus, after glancing at the menu with bemusement, said, Whatever she's having. The waitress raised a brow. 2 blacks. Got it. As soon as she left, Bri leaned back, arms crossed. So, Cyrus Rose, billionaire, CEO, the man in every glossy magazine headline. He winced. You read those? Only when they're in front of me at the checkout line, she said dryly. They usually say you've broken another engagement or bought another company. Both true, he admitted. But neither explains why I'm sitting here now. Her eyes narrowed. And why are you? Cyrus exhaled. He wasn't used to confessing, especially not to strangers. But something in her gaze pressed the truth out of him. Because when you spoke to me last night, I felt seen. Not as a name, not as a bank account, just a man in a chair. Bri looked down at her mug, steam fogging the air between them. When she spoke, her voice was softer. Maybe that's because I didn't know who you were. Or maybe, he countered gently, because you didn't care. The coffees arrived, breaking the moment. Bri wrapped her hands around hers, as if stealing heat. Cyrus tried a sip and grimaced. She noticed. Figures, she muttered. World's richest man, ruined by diner coffee. He almost laughed. I've survived worse. She leaned forward, eyes steady. If you're expecting me to be impressed, you're going to be disappointed. He met her gaze, unflinching. Good. I've had enough of impressed. For the first time, Bri felt a crack in her own defenses. She didn't trust men like him, never had. But there was something in the way he said it, quiet and unpolished, that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, he meant it. The apartment smelled faintly of laundry soap and crayons. Bri Buckley pushed the door open with her hip, setting a grocery bag on the counter. Evan was already at the small table by the window, sketching in his notebook, his face scrunched in concentration. She signed as she slipped off her coat. Math homework first, drawings later. Evan pouted and tapped his pencil against the page. Drawing makes math better. Bri laughed quietly. You'll argue your way into being a lawyer one day, she said aloud, knowing he could read her lips. He smirked, then leaned over his paper again. The room was small, 2 rooms for 2 people, but it was theirs. She'd painted the walls herself, patched the leaky faucet with duct tape, learned how to fix the heater from a YouTube video. It wasn't much, but it was home. A knock rattled the door. She froze. Hardly anyone visited unannounced. When she opened it, Cyrus Rose stood there, the sharp cut of his coat at odds with the peeling hallway paint. Her eyes narrowed. Seriously, he lifted a hand, half apologetic. Before you slam the door, I just wanted to return this. He held out a small sketchbook. Evan dropped it outside the cafe. Bri's gaze darted past him, then to the book. She snatched it quickly, her voice firm. Thank you. You didn't have to bring it yourself. I wanted to. His eyes softened as they flicked to Evan behind her. He's talented. Bri sighed, setting the book on the counter. You don't even know him. No, Cyrus admitted. But I'd like to. Her jaw tightened. That's not how this works. He doesn't need strangers walking in and out of his life. From the table, Evan tilted his head curiously. He signed, "Who is he?" Bri answered quickly, "Just someone returning your notebook." Cyrus crouched slightly, lowering his voice. "Hi, Evan," he said, careful and slow. Then he attempted a clumsy sign. "Hello." Evan blinked, then giggled at the awkward hand shape. He signed back, exaggerated. "That was wrong." Cyrus chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I figured." Bri crossed her arms. "You see, this isn't some hobby you can try once. His world isn't easy." "I know," Cyrus said quietly. "That's why I want to learn." The honesty in his voice startled her. She opened her mouth to argue, but Evan tugged her sleeve, signing eagerly. He tried. Let him try again. Bri hesitated, then exhaled. "Fine. One more word. Then you're leaving." Cyrus nodded, determined. He attempted another sign, slower this time. "Friend." Evan's grin spread wide, his hands clapping together in delight. "Better," he signed, then scribbled quickly on his notebook and held it up to Cyrus. On the page, "You can practice with me." Something flickered in Cyrus's chest, warmth, fragile and dangerous. Bri saw it, and fear twisted inside her. She couldn't let Evan get attached. Not to a man like this. Not when the chances of him staying were slim. She cleared her throat. "You've done your good deed. Thank you. Now please go." Cyrus straightened, pain flashing across his face, but he nodded. "I'll go." He paused at the door. "But I'll come back, if you'll let me." Bri didn't answer. She shut the door softly, pressing her back against it. Her hands trembled. Evan peeked up at her, eyes shining. "I like him," he signed simply. Bri's heart ached. "That's the problem," she whispered. The next Saturday, Cyrus did something unusual for him. He canceled a meeting. His assistant had stared in disbelief when he said, "Push the board to Monday." He didn't explain why. He simply stepped into his car and gave an address he wasn't supposed to know by heart. Bri Street. The building looked even smaller in daylight, its paint peeling, its windows clouded with condensation. He hesitated outside, aware of how out of place he appeared. Wealth clung to him like a second skin. His coat, his watch, his shoes, and he hated it more than ever. Still, he knocked. Bri opened the door, her expression sharp. "You again." "Me again," he said, attempting a smile. "Before you tell me to leave." Evan dropped this at the cafe yesterday. He held out a box of colored pencils. Her eyes narrowed. "He didn't drop those. You bought them." Cyrus shrugged. "Guilty." "Why?" "Because every artist needs colors," he said simply. Then, softer, "May I come in?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. Evan was on the floor with his sketchbook, surrounded by crayon stubs worn down to paper. He looked up and waved enthusiastically when he saw Cyrus. "5 minutes," Bri muttered, stepping aside. Cyrus entered, careful not to let his polished shoes scuff the uneven floorboards. He crouched near Evan, holding out the box. "These are for you." Evan's eyes widened as he pulled off the lid. Blues, greens, golds, every shade he'd never had before. He signed rapidly, Thank you. Cyrus tried to mirror the motion, clumsy but earnest. His fingers twisted wrong. Evan burst out laughing, the soundless joy shaking his shoulders. What did he say? Cyrus asked Bri, helpless. She sighed. He said you messed it up. Badly. Cyrus chuckled. Story of my life. He looked at Evan. Can you teach me? Evan's grin returned. He grabbed his notebook, scrawled quickly, and held it up. Yes. Start with my name. Then he showed the sign, sharp and confident. Cyrus mimicked, fumbling. Evan shook his head, exaggeratedly stern. He corrected him again and again until finally Cyrus got it right. Evan clapped his hands, then signed, Good! Your name! Cyrus's chest tightened. He hadn't felt this kind of victory in years, one not with money or negotiation, but with effort. Still, as he glanced at Bri, he saw the tension in her shoulders. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. You don't owe him or me anything. I know, Cyrus replied. His gaze lingered on Evan, who was already sketching with his new pencils. But I want to. Bri crossed her arms. Wanting doesn't make you ready. That struck harder than he expected. He turned to her. You think I can't handle this? She met his eyes, unflinching. I think you've lived in a world where you can buy solutions. This isn't that. Raising a deaf child isn't a challenge you solve once. It's every day, every hour, for years. And if you can't commit to that, don't start. Her words pierced him because they were true. For the first time, Cyrus felt a flicker of fear. Fear that he wasn't built for this, that he would fail, that he would become exactly like the father who had never known how to reach him. He forced a smile for Evan's sake, but his voice shook when he said, Then maybe I'll just have to prove you wrong. Bri studied him, torn between skepticism and the smallest spark of hope. She didn't answer. Evan did. He slid his notebook across the floor toward Cyrus. On the page, in uneven letters, was a single word. Friend. Cyrus swallowed hard. Yeah, he whispered. Friend. But inside, he wondered if he could ever be more, and whether he was brave enough to try. For the next week, Cyrus found excuses to drift back into Bri's orbit. At first, she bristled whenever she saw him, but Evan's delight each time he appeared softened her resistance. The boy would wave, scribble a note, or tug Cyrus's sleeve to show him a drawing, and every time Cyrus stayed a little longer. One evening, he found them outside the grocery store, Bri struggling with 2 heavy bags while Evan carried one half his size. Cyrus approached before she could refuse. Let me help. He reached for a bag. Bri scowled. I can manage. Sure you can, he said easily. But why should you? Against her pride, she let him take one. Evan signed quickly, strong muscles, then added with a grin, 2 fancy shoes. Cyrus laughed. Guilty on both counts. Bri rolled her eyes but hid a smile as they walked toward her building. Inside, Evan dumped his bag and rummaged for his sketchbook. He scribbled furiously, then held it up. Dinner with us. Bri gasped. Evan. Cyrus's brows lifted. Dinner. The boy nodded, eyes wide with hope. Bri hesitated, then sighed. Fine, but don't expect much. It's pasta night. Again. Cyrus smiled. Best offer I've had all week. At the table, the air smelled of garlic and tomato sauce. Evan twirled his pasta with childlike enthusiasm. Cyrus ate slowly, almost reverently, as if the simple meal mattered more than the $1,000 dishes he was used to. "This is good," he said sincerely. Bri gave him a look. "Don't mock my cooking." "I'm not," he protested. "I mean it. When was the last time I had dinner that wasn't delivered on silver trays?" "Too long." She raised an eyebrow. "And now you're here eating noodles with us. Doesn't that feel less?" "Less." Cyrus shook his head. "No. More. A lot more." The words slipped out before he could stop them. For a moment, their eyes met, and something flickered in the silence. Dangerous, tender. Evan broke it with a note shoved across the table. "Teach him sign." Bri chuckled, but Cyrus leaned forward eagerly. "What's first?" She relented, showing him the sign for "thank you." He copied, clumsy but earnest. Evan giggled and clapped. "Not bad," Bri admitted. "High praise," Cyrus teased. Then softer, "I'll get better. I want to." Her gaze softened despite herself. "Why?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Because if I can't speak to him, I don't deserve to be here." The honesty in his tone made her throat tighten. She looked away, busying herself with refilling Evan's plate. After dinner, Evan curled on the couch with his sketchbook, eyes drooping. Cyrus stood, uncertain. "Do you want me to go?" Bri glanced at him. "You should." Then, after a pause, "But thank you for helping, for trying." He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'll keep trying." As he left, Evan ran to the door, notebook in hand. He held it up. "Come back." Cyrus's chest tightened. He looked at Bri. She didn't stop him, but she didn't encourage him either. He bent down, met Evan's gaze and signed. Awkward, but clear, "Friend." The boy's grin lit the room. Bri's eyes softened, even as she whispered to herself, "This can't last." But a part of her, the part she had buried deep, wanted to believe it just might. The following week, Cyrus invited them to a quiet park on the edge of the city. The grass was patchy, the playground old, but Evan loved it. He ran ahead, clutching his sketchbook, while Cyrus and Bri followed at a slower pace. "He's happier outside," Bri said softly. Cyrus glanced at her. "He's happier with you." She didn't answer. The wind tugged at her coat, and she tightened it, watching her son climb the rusty slide with determination. When Evan settled on a bench to draw, Cyrus turned to her. "You still don't trust me." Bri folded her arms. "Should I?" "I'm trying." She cut him off. "Trying is easy when it's new. You buy pencils, you learn a few signs, you show up at dinner. But what about when it's hard? When Evan has a bad day, when he shuts down and won't let anyone in? You'll leave. They always do." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she looked away quickly. Cyrus's chest tightened. "Bri." "No," she said firmly, her eyes flashing. "You don't know what this takes. You've lived your life with every door open. Evan's world is different. You can't buy patience. You can't buy understanding. And I can't risk letting you into his life only to have you walk away." For once, Cyrus didn't argue. He looked at the boy hunched over his sketchbook, tongue poking out in concentration, and something inside him cracked. "You're right," he said quietly. Bri blinked, startled. "What?" "You're right. I don't know what it takes. I don't know how to be what he needs." He swallowed hard. "I've spent my whole life building walls so no one could expect that of me." She stared at him, unsure. "Then why are you here?" His voice lowered. "Because I want to learn. Even if I fail. Even if I'm terrified. Because every time I see him laugh, or you smile, I realize how empty my life has been without it. Bri's defenses wavered, just for a heartbeat. But fear clawed back. Words are easy. Evan doesn't need promises. He needs someone who won't run when it gets hard. Cyrus exhaled, a harsh, shaky breath. I've run from a lot of things in my life. Maybe it's time I stopped. Their eyes locked, unspoken truths pulling between them. Then Evan bounded back, holding up his notebook proudly. On the page was a sketch of 3 figures: a tall man, a woman with long hair, and a boy in the middle holding both their hands. Above it, he'd written, "Together." Bri's throat tightened. She looked at Cyrus, searching his face for a reaction. He crouched to Evan's level, his voice rough. "That's the best picture I've ever seen." Evan grinned, oblivious to the storm between them. He tugged Cyrus's sleeve, signing, "Stay and play." Cyrus nodded. Of course. But when Bri looked at him, her eyes were still clouded with doubt. For her, trust was a wall that had taken years to build, and she wasn't ready to tear it down for anyone. Cyrus had spent his whole life perfecting one thing: control. In boardrooms, in negotiations, in every social arena, he knew how to hold the upper hand. But when he sat in a dim classroom at the Ellswood Community Center on a Wednesday evening, surrounded by posters of hand shapes and fingerspelling charts, he felt like a man stripped of all his armor. The instructor, a patient woman with quick hands and kind eyes, smiled at him. "Everyone here is starting from zero," she said. "You're not alone." But Cyrus felt alone. His suit jacket lay folded on the chair beside him. His hands, those same hands that signed billion-dollar contracts, fumbled like they didn't belong to him. "Try again," the instructor encouraged. "This is the sign for understand." He repeated it, clumsy. She corrected him gently. He tried again. When the class ended, Cyrus lingered by the door, exhausted in a way board meetings never made him. He checked his phone, 14 missed calls, 5 urgent emails. He ignored them. For once, none of it mattered. 2 nights later, Bri was leaving the cafe after her shift when she found him leaning against the lamppost outside. She froze. "What are you doing here?" Cyrus straightened. "Waiting for you." "Why?" He lifted his hands, hesitated, then slowly signed, "Hello, how are you?" Her eyes widened. "You?" She stopped, stunned. "You've been learning?" "A little," he admitted, voice low. "I wanted to surprise Evan." For a moment, Bri didn't know what to say. Her instinct screamed at her to push him away. But another part of her, a part aching from years of carrying everything alone, softened. "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted gently. "I need to. If I can't speak his language, how can I ever be in his life?" Her throat tightened. She looked at him, really looked, at the man who had always seemed untouchable, now fumbling with signs like a schoolboy, awkward but determined. Before she could answer, a small voice tugged at her memory. "They always leave." She shook her head, trying to shield herself. "This doesn't change anything. You'll get tired. You'll find it too hard. And then you'll disappear." Cyrus's jaw tightened. "I've spent years disappearing. Into work, into parties, into people I never cared about. I'm done with that." He stepped closer, his eyes steady. "I want to be here, with you, with him." Her chest ached with a mix of fear and longing. "Why, Cyrus? Why us?" He answered without hesitation. "Because when I'm with you, I'm not Cyrus Rose, the man on magazine covers. I'm just a man. And when I'm with Evan, I remember what it feels like to hope I can be better than who I was yesterday. Silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Then the cafe door burst open and Evan ran out, waving his sketchbook. He spotted Cyrus and grinned. Cyrus crouched instantly, signing, awkward but clear, "Friend. Missed you." Evan's eyes lit up. He giggled silently and threw his arms around Cyrus's neck. Bri stood frozen, her heart twisting. She had never seen her son hug anyone outside of family. She swallowed hard, whispering to herself, "This isn't supposed to happen," but it already had. Snow fell that Saturday afternoon, dusting the park in white silence. Bri sat on a bench, her scarf wrapped tight, watching Evan chase flakes with his sketchbook open like a butterfly net. Cyrus walked beside the boy, bending down now and then to see his drawings. He wasn't graceful with children. He looked like a man trying to negotiate with the wind, but he was trying. Bri's chest ached at the sight. She should have felt relief, gratitude even. Instead, a cold knot of fear twisted inside her. When Cyrus returned to the bench, brushing snow from his coat, she forced a smile. "You don't have to keep doing this, you know?" He blinked. "Doing what?" "Showing up. Pretending you fit into this." Her voice was sharper than she meant. "I'm not pretending," he said quietly. "You are. You're a man with skyscrapers and boardrooms and cars that cost more than this entire building block. And she looked away. "I can't let Evan get used to something that won't last." Cyrus studied her, the softness in his eyes replaced by something heavier. "You think I'll walk away?" "I know you will," she whispered. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day it'll get too hard. He'll have a meltdown you won't know how to handle. Or someone from your world will sneer, and you'll remember where you belong. And then you'll leave." His throat tightened. "Bri." She shook her head fiercely. "I can't risk it. He's already starting to look for you. Did you see how he hugged you? He doesn't do that with anyone. If you go, it'll break him. And I won't let that happen." For a moment, the falling snow muffled everything but the rush of his heartbeat. He thought of his own childhood, of waiting in empty rooms for a father who never came. He thought of how easily he could become that same disappointment. "You're right," he said at last, his voice rough. "I am terrified. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know if I can live up to what he needs." Bri's eyes shimmered, but she stayed firm. "Then don't start what you can't finish." He swallowed hard. "But what if I want to finish it? What if I'm willing to learn, to fight through the hard parts, to stay even when it scares me?" She looked at him, torn. Her lips trembled, but her walls stayed up. "Wanting isn't enough." Evan came running back, cheeks flushed, holding out his sketchbook. On the page was a snowman with 3 figures standing beside it. A woman, a man, and a boy. Above them, written in uneven letters, "Family." Cyrus felt the word strike deep. He met Bri's eyes, but she turned away quickly, blinking back tears. "Don't let him draw lies," she whispered. Her words cut deeper than any insult ever had. For once, Cyrus didn't know how to respond. He only watched Evan skip away again, and the silence between him and Bri felt heavier than the snow pressing down on the world. The first real test came on a cold Thursday evening. Bri had been called in for a late shift at the diner, and Evan's babysitter canceled at the last minute. She stood in her tiny kitchen, coat in hand, panic rising. "I'll just call out," she muttered. "They can fire me if they want." "No," Evan signed, shaking his head. Work. Go. Her phone buzzed. A message. From Cyrus. Are you and Evan okay? Her fingers hovered, then typed back before she could stop herself. Babysitter canceled. I can't go in. 2 minutes later, another message. I'll come. She froze. No, she whispered to herself, heart pounding. But before she could reply, there was a knock at the door. Cyrus stood there, slightly breathless, his tie loosened, as if he'd run straight from a meeting. Let me help. Absolutely not, she said immediately. This isn't your responsibility. It is if you'll let it be. His gaze flicked to Evan, who was already grinning. Please, trust me just this once. Bri's chest tightened. She looked at Evan, who signed eagerly. Yes, let him stay. Against every instinct, she handed over. Fine, but if anything goes wrong, it won't, he promised softly. The hours that followed would etch themselves into Cyrus's memory forever. At first, Evan tested him. He signed too fast, scribbled demands on paper, dragged him from sketchbooks to board games to endless questions. Cyrus fumbled, sweating, mixing up signs, misreading notes. Evan laughed at him, rolled his eyes, then patiently corrected him again. Like this, Evan signed slower this time. Cyrus copied, clumsy but determined. Better, Evan grinned. They built a tower of blocks that collapsed 3 times. They ate cereal straight from the box. They sprawled on the floor, drawing side by side. At one point, Evan wrote a sentence and shoved it at him. You're funny when you mess up. Cyrus laughed so hard it startled even himself. Later, when bedtime came, Cyrus sat awkwardly on the edge of the small bed. Evan tugged his sleeve, signed, Read. Cyrus blinked. Read? You mean out loud? Evan nodded, holding up a battered children's book. Cyrus cleared his throat and began, stumbling over the silly rhymes, his deep voice unfamiliar in such a gentle rhythm. Evan's eyes fluttered shut, his breathing evening out. Cyrus stayed long after the story ended, watching the boy sleep. Something inside him cracked wide open. When Bri returned near midnight, she braced for chaos. Instead, she found her son fast asleep, his sketchbook on the floor, and Cyrus sitting quietly beside him. Still in his loosened tie, exhaustion etched across his face. He looked up at her, almost apologetic. He's out. We read 3 times. Her heart twisted at the sight. This man who could command entire industries, humbled in a tiny bedroom, keeping watch over a child that wasn't his. You stayed, she whispered. Of course I did, he said simply. She swallowed hard. Why? You didn't have to. Cyrus glanced at Evan, then back at her. His voice broke just slightly. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't want to be anywhere else. Bri's breath caught. Walls she had held for years trembled, threatening to fall. And in that fragile silence, she realized. He wasn't proving himself to her with words anymore. He was proving it with love. Winter deepened, and the city dressed itself in strings of lights. Shop windows glowed, carolers filled street corners, and the chill carried with it something almost like magic. Bri walked beside Cyrus through the community center where Evan now attended a small art workshop. Inside, a group of children gathered around long tables covered in paints, pencils, and paper. At the far end, Evan sat hunched over his sketchbook, tongue poking out as he worked furiously. When he noticed them, his face lit up. He held up the drawing before it was even finished. 3 figures, hand in hand, surrounded by falling snow. Bri's throat tightened. She whispered, "He draws us like this every time now." Cyrus studied the page, his chest tightening. "Because that's what he sees." Evan tugged his sleeve, insisting he look closer. Then the boy signed carefully, "Family." Cyrus froze. His hands, awkward but steady, shaped the word back, "Family." Bri's breath caught. She hadn't realized until that moment how desperately she had wanted to hear it. Not with sound, but with truth. Later, outside the center, the three of them walked slowly beneath the falling snow. Evan skipped ahead, leaving tiny prints in the powder. Bri pulled her coat tighter, nerves buzzing in her chest. "Cyrus," she said softly, "you don't have to." He stopped her with a look. "Don't say it. Don't give me an out. I don't want one." She searched his face, seeing no trace of the guarded man she'd first met. Just someone who had chosen them. "You're not afraid anymore?" she asked. He exhaled, his voice rough. "I'm terrified, but I'm staying anyway." Her eyes burned. "You don't know what that means to us." He stepped closer, brushing a snowflake from her hair. "Then let me spend the rest of my life finding out." Evan turned, spotting them, and signed with both hands, "Together." Cyrus and Bri looked at each other, then raised their own hands, echoing the sign. Together. The snow fell heavier, softening the world into silence. And in that silence, for the first time in years, all three of them felt at home.